The number, staggering, and it arrived sooner than predicted. The debt roughly doubling in less than 10 years. So what does all this mean to you? CNN's Matt Egan is here to break it all down for us. I guess the big question is, how is this going to impact Americans? And not just now, but potentially for the long run.
Yeah, Sarah, I mean, $40 trillion. This is another grim milestone. This number, it's so hard to even wrap your head around. It's just such a big number. Let's look at the live tracker of the national debt. You see just over $40 trillion. Now, if you broke that down per person, per every single person in the United States, it's almost $120,000, just staggering. And when you look at this is a look at how fast it's growing. Almost $5 million per minute, Sarah. So just since we started talking, we've added about $5 million to the national debt, $285 million per hour, and almost $7 billion a day. And again, when you look at what this means per person, talk about $117,000 per person in the United States. We look at the trend for the national debt. Going back to the start of the century, it was around $6 trillion in the year 2000. But look at this. It has just skyrocketed since then. Why? Because of government spending, because of tax cuts, because of war after war after war, because in 2008, right around here, you had a once-in-a-century financial crisis. And then in 2020, we had a once-in-a-century pandemic. You put it all together, and yes, you get $40 trillion. Now, it's also true that the U.S. economy is a lot bigger today than it was back in 2000. That's why we like to look at debt to GDP. Now, even on that metric, though, things are moving in the wrong direction. Back in 1966, the debt was about 40% of the economy. 1996, 64%. But look at this, more than the entire size of the economy, and it's projected to go higher and higher. Now, one of the reasons the debt has gone up is because the United States has these aging demographics, right? Every single day, you've got about 10,000 baby boomers retiring, and that has forced the government to spend more on what? Social Security, right? So far this fiscal year alone, $1.4 trillion in Social Security, another $955 billion on Medicare. But this is not just about aging demographics. Look at this net interest. This is essentially how much the government has to spend just to finance the mountain of debt. $931 billion just this fiscal year, on track to surpass $1 trillion. And what's really notable is, look at this. We're spending more to finance the debt than on the national defense, right? More money going to the creditors than on stealth bombers, on the war, on military paychecks. Why does this matter? Look, this is important because investors, they're starting to get a little bit more concerned about the national debt. We've seen bond prices sell off, and that has driven up Treasury rates. And that's critical because Treasuries, they are the benchmark for the cost of borrowing across the economy. So the higher Treasury rates go, the more expensive it is to get a mortgage. And mortgages are already really expensive. The more expensive it is to get small business loans, car loans as well. And of course, the more expensive it is for the government itself to borrow. So look, bottom line, this is clearly a mess. There's a lot of finger pointing going on. I think the truth is there's a lot of blame to go around, right? This has gone up under Republicans, under Democrats, during good times, during bad times. This is a look at $40 trillion. What does it equal? This is the economy of China, Germany, Japan, the UK, and India combined. But look, this...
Oh my God. Did you guys see that? The national debt is bigger than the economies of China, Germany, Japan, India, and the UK combined. This is what we're seeing. This is what we're facing. And we are busy fighting each other, distracted, instead of speaking with one voice. We're busy dividing ourselves into camps, the left, the right, the blacks, the whites, the rich, the poor, and all other categorizations. And of course, that's what the system wants. Get distracted, keep fighting each other, so that they can keep doing things on our behalf that we're not aware of. Let's keep going.
This is such a big mess that it's not something that any one party is going to be able to solve. They're going to have to come together. It's going to need bipartisan compromise.
You hear that? bipartisan compromise. Would that ever happen? I don't know.
As Matt said there, everyone is to blame for the size of the debt right now. I will say this, though, Republicans in particular, they seem to hate deficits and the national debt, except when they control the government here. So how much of a problem is it for them right now?
Yeah, I mean, we see the storyline play out over and over again, where when Republicans are in the minority, they talk about needing to make serious cuts and take real action to lower the national debt. And then when they're in power, we see the debt continue to grow, if not by at an even faster pace. And, you know, of course, there are the handful of conservatives in the House and the Senate who have continued to push for cuts to government spending. But of course, they are always overruled by the rest of the Republicans and by President Trump in the White House, who clearly does not care so much about the national debt when he is in the White House. And I do think it's interesting when we look at the beginning of this term of this administration, there was so much emphasis on DOGE, on limiting government spending, on taking serious actions to cut back on how much the federal government spends and wastes. And we have seen that conversation shift away, and we don't hear a lot of that same fervor from Republicans these days.
Of course, you will not hear from them because they're in power. So if I'm in power, I spend money. If I'm not in power, I raise hell. That's basically what it is. These guys are showmen. They're playing us. They're playing with our emotion. They're playing our pocketbook. They're playing with our lives. And we're busy fighting each other. When are we going to learn? Let's keep going.
And Margaret, in the communications business, we would say there's something of an optics problem here too, because as the national debt crossed the $40 trillion threshold, President Trump was outside talking about spending on home improvements. Listen.
I'm fixing the country, we're fixing the White House too. We got rid of the asphalt here, and this is granite. It's called the flawless granite. We get the best stuff. This was all black asphalt that was in terrible shape. The grass was in terrible shape. This has all been redone. It's all been topsoiled.
Now, President Trump has shown that he has remarkable political instincts over the last 10, 12 years on some things. But this, Margaret, what do you think about his continued emphasis on this sort of spending in home improvement and beautification around D.C.?
If you're going to do the granite, it should definitely be the flawless granite. You know, look, John, there are so many different ways to look at this, but one is that since President Trump first ran a decade ago for office for the first term, the national debt has actually doubled. And bringing the debt under control was one of his campaign commitments way back when. And we're starting to hear the term debt spiral more and more. And like, I'm not trying to totally alarm anyone at 7:30 in the morning, but the idea with the debt spiral is that at a certain point, your borrowing cost becomes so much that you're spending more and more taxpayer money to pay the borrowing costs. It does increase things like, it does increase not just the government's tab, but how much consumers pay when they have to borrow money, and many Americans borrow money. So something like 9 in 10 Americans, the Peterson Foundation polled this earlier this year, about 9 in 10 Americans think debt is a real serious problem for the country and is really going to hurt them. Most Americans think that cutting spending is the only answer, like that's the way to get it done. And the reality is, at this track, because of bipartisan spending, and you may actually have to cut spending and raise taxes. At the same time, we're looking at polling and focus groups about how Americans are feeling about the president's various construction projects, the fights over signs, and that sort of thing. About 2/3 of Americans in that recent Washington Post Ipsos poll disagree with his focus on construction projects. So there is a mismatch right now politically.
Yeah.
Well, guys, do you blame them? Do you blame our politicians? Do you blame them for wanting to spend money on home improvements instead of us? We gave them the power. We got distracted. We keep fighting each other. We keep trying to outperform the other. We keep pointing finger at each other instead of the real problems. The only way this can be solved is by working together. That's the only way. We have to work together. There's no other way. Because we rise together, we fall together. You can be living in the nice neighborhood. You can be living in the worst neighborhood. It's still America. It's still a geographical location. And eventually, you'll find each other on the same roads, in the same markets, in the fields, at the sports game. Nobody is isolated. So we need to really keep our eyes open. We need to figure out, what are we doing? When are we going to understand that we have given our power away and it's time to take it back? So subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment. Because this problem is not going to go away by we keeping our heads in the sand as if it doesn't exist, or behaving as if it's only happened to one set of people and not the other. It's not going to work. So let's come together.